I stood in the courthouse hallway, holding a manila folder that contained 30 years of my life, reduced to numbers and signatures. My hands weren't shaking. That surprised me. I thought they would be. My brother David sat on the bench across from me, his expensive lawyer whispering something in his ear. He wouldn't look at me. Hadn't looked at me in 6 months. Not since the day my daughter announced her engagement, and everything I thought I knew about my family shattered like glass. "Mrs. Lawson?" The clerk opened the door. "They're ready for you." I stood up. David finally glanced my way. There was something in his eyes. Fear, maybe, or guilt. I couldn't tell anymore. But here's what I knew. I wasn't the victim they thought I was. Not anymore. Because 6 months ago, when I discovered what they'd done, I made a choice. I could scream, I could cry, I could beg them to tell me why. Or I could do what I'd done for 3 decades as a nurse, stay calm, gather evidence, and act with precision. But that was just the beginning of my plan. My name is Margaret Lawson. I'm 62 years old, and up until last September, I thought I had a pretty good life. I'd worked as a registered nurse for 30 years at Mercy General in our small California coastal town. I'd raised my daughter Emily as a single mom after my husband passed when she was 7. I'd paid off my modest house, saved for retirement, and kept close ties with my older brother David and his family. We weren't the kind of family that hugged a lot or said "I love you" every day, but we were there for each other. At least that's what I believed. The day Emily called me with her news, I was in my garden, pruning the roses my mother had planted 40 years ago. "Mom?" Her voice was bright, almost breathless. "Jake proposed." "Oh, honey, when? Tell me everything." She laughed, that beautiful laugh that still sounded like she was 10 years old. "Last night at the pier, he had this whole thing planned with candles and, Mom, I want you to help plan the wedding. I want you there for everything." "Of course I will be, of course." My eyes filled with tears. Good tears, happy tears. I called David immediately after. "David, Emily's engaged. Can you believe it? Our little Emily." There was a pause, a long one. "David? That's great, Maggie. Really great." His voice was flat, distant. "You okay? You sound weird." "Just busy. Work stuff. Congratulations to Emily." He hung up before I could say anything else. I stood there in my kitchen, phone still in my hand, with the strangest feeling in my chest, like something had shifted, just slightly, but enough to throw everything off balance. Over the next 2 weeks, I tried to share my excitement with my family. I called David 3 more times. He didn't answer. I texted my niece Cassie, David's daughter, asking if she wanted to be a bridesmaid. She read the message, I could see the little check mark, but never replied. My nephew Brian, who I'd helped put through nursing school, didn't respond either. It was like I'd vanished. "Maybe they're just busy," Emily said when I mentioned it, but I could hear the concern in her voice. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you love, this story is for you, because what came next wasn't just rejection, it was calculated destruction. The wedding was set for April. In October, Emily wanted to do a small engagement party. Nothing fancy, just family and close friends at my place. I cleaned the house, made my mother's famous lasagna, bought flowers for every room. I wanted everything to be perfect. David said he'd come. So did Cassie and Brian. Even David's wife Linda confirmed. The day of the party, I set the table for 12. Emily and Jake arrived early to help. We laughed, we cooked, we reminisced. By 7 o'clock, no one else had shown up. By 7:30, Emily was checking her phone every 2 minutes. By 8, I knew. They weren't coming. Emily tried calling Cassie. Straight to voicemail. Jake called Brian. Same thing. Maybe there was an emergency? Emily's voice was small. I put my arm around her. "Maybe, honey. Let's just enjoy the evening, the 3 of us." But I knew. Deep in my gut, where truth lives before your mind catches up, I knew something was very wrong. 2 days later, I drove to David's house unannounced. I needed to see his face. I needed him to tell me what was happening. Linda answered the door. When she saw me, her expression shifted, not surprise, but something closer to discomfort. "Margaret, hi. Is David home? He's not feeling well." "Linda, what's going on? Why is everyone avoiding me?" She looked over her shoulder, then stepped outside, pulling the door almost closed behind her. "Margaret, I think you should talk to a lawyer." My blood went cold. "What?" "There is an investigation into the trust account. Your name is on the paperwork as the primary manager." "What trust account?" But even as I said it, I knew. The family trust, the one my parents had set up before they died, the one that was supposed to cover my mother's medical care in her final years, and then be distributed to David and me equally. "I don't manage that account, Linda. David does. I signed some papers years ago, but he handles everything." Linda's face was sympathetic, but closed off. "I'm sorry, Margaret. I really am. But you need to protect yourself." She went back inside and shut the door. I sat in my car for 20 minutes, hands gripping the steering wheel, trying to breathe. I hired a lawyer the next day. His name was Robert Chen, a calm, methodical man in his 50s who'd handled a case for one of my coworkers. "Tell me everything," he said. So I did. I told him about my parents' trust, set up in 2008 when my mother was diagnosed with Alzheimer's. My father had died 3 years earlier. The trust was meant to ensure Mom got the care she needed, and whatever remained would be split between David and me. David had always been the financial one in the family. He ran a small commercial real estate business. He said he'd handle the trust, that I shouldn't worry about it. I was working full-time, raising Emily alone. I was grateful. I'd signed papers, I remember that much, but I trusted him to do what was right. "Do you have copies of those documents?" Robert asked. "No, David said he'd keep everything organized." Robert made a note. "And your mother, when did she pass?" 4 years ago, 2020. So the trust should have been settled by now. I assumed it was. David never mentioned any problems. Robert leaned back. "Mrs. Lawson, you're listed as the trustee of record. That means legally, you're responsible for all transactions. There's been an investigation triggered by suspicious withdrawals, large sums taken out over the last 5 years. The state believes those funds were misused." The room tilted. "Misused how?" "Withdrawn for purposes outside the trust stipulations, personal expenses, business investments. If proven, it's a felony." "But I didn't take that money. I didn't even know." "I believe you, but we need to prove it. And Margaret, there's something else." He hesitated. "The complaint was filed by your brother and your nephew. They're claiming you acted without their knowledge." I couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. They'd set me up. My own brother, my own family. That night, I sat alone in my kitchen and let myself cry. Not the gentle tears I'd cried when Emily called with her engagement news. These were deep, wrenching sobs that came from somewhere I didn't know existed. How could they do this? I'd helped Brian through school. I'd been there when Cassie had her miscarriage. I'd sat with David after his first business failed, told him it would be okay, lent him money I never asked to be repaid, and this was how they repaid me? Emily came over the next morning. She held me while I told her everything. "Mom, this is insane. Uncle David wouldn't—" "He did, honey. He did." She pulled back, her face hard with anger. "Then we fight. We fight this with everything we have." I looked at my daughter, strong, fierce, so much like me, and I made a decision. I wasn't going to fall apart. I wasn't going to let them destroy me. I was going to do what I'd always done: stay calm, think clearly, and act with precision. If you've ever felt like the world turned against you, you know what I'm talking about. Robert and I spent the next 2 months building my defense. We requested every bank record, every document, every email related to the trust. What we found was damning, but not for me. The withdrawals had started 6 years ago, right after my mother's condition worsened and she moved into full-time care. Large sums, $15,000 here, $20,000 there. The memo lines said things like medical expenses and facility care, but when we cross-referenced those withdrawals with the actual medical bills, they didn't match. The nursing home costs were being paid separately through insurance and a smaller account. So where had the money gone? Robert dug deeper. He found that many of the withdrawals coincided with David's business transactions, property purchases, loan payments. David had been using the trust as his personal ATM, and every single withdrawal had a forged signature, mine. How do we prove the signatures are forged? I asked. Robert smiled. It wasn't a kind smile. It was the smile of someone who'd found the smoking gun. We get a forensic handwriting analyst, and we compare these signatures to documents we know you actually signed: employment records, your mortgage, your tax returns. We did exactly that. The analyst's report was unequivocal. The signatures on the trust withdrawals were not mine. They were close. Someone had tried to copy my handwriting, but the pressure points, the slant, the letter formations were all wrong. Robert leaned across his desk. Margaret, this is fraud. Your brother committed fraud, and he tried to frame you for it. I should have felt victorious, but all I felt was hollow. The hearing was set for February. The week before, I did something I hadn't in months. I went to visit my mother's grave. It was a gray, cold morning, the kind of morning where the ocean fog rolls in so thick you can barely see 10 feet ahead. I knelt by her headstone and traced her name with my fingers. I'm sorry, Mom. I'm sorry I didn't see what he was doing. The wind picked up, rustling the dried flowers someone, probably me, months ago, had left. And then I heard it. Not a voice exactly, more like a memory. My mother's voice from years ago, when I was young and David had blamed me for breaking her favorite vase. Margaret, the truth always comes out. Always. You just have to be patient. I stood up, brushed the dirt off my knees, and walked back to my car. I wasn't just going to clear my name. I was going to make sure the truth came out. All of it. The courthouse was colder than I expected. Or maybe it was just me. I sat next to Robert at the long table, my folder of evidence in front of me. Across the aisle, David sat with his lawyer, a sharp-dressed woman who looked like she could argue her way out of anything. David still wouldn't look at me. The mediator, a tired-looking man in his 60s, shuffled papers and cleared his throat. This is a preliminary hearing to address allegations of trust fund mismanagement. Mrs. Margaret Lawson, you're accused of unauthorized withdrawals from the family trust established by your parents. Mr. David Lawson and Mr. Brian Lawson have filed the complaint. Let's begin. David's lawyer stood up. She was smooth, confident. Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Mrs. Lawson was the trustee of record. She had sole signing authority. Over the past 6 years, over $200,000 has been withdrawn from the trust for purposes unrelated to the beneficiary's care. We have bank statements, withdrawal slips, all bearing her signature. She slid a stack of papers across the table. The mediator looked at me. Mrs. Lawson, how do you respond? I stood up. My voice was steady, calm. Those aren't my signatures. David's lawyer smiled. Mrs. Lawson, we have 23 separate documents. Those aren't my signatures, I repeated, and I can prove it. Robert stood beside me. Your Honor, we've retained a forensic handwriting analyst. The report clearly shows the signatures on those withdrawal documents were forged. He handed over the analyst's report. The mediator took it, flipped through it slowly. His expression didn't change, but I saw something shift in his eyes. Mr. Lawson, he said, looking at David, were you involved in any of these transactions? David's lawyer cut in. My client was not the trustee. He had no legal authority. That's not what I asked. The mediator's voice was sharp now. Mr. Lawson, did you benefit from any of these withdrawals? David finally looked up. His face was pale. I used some of the funds for business purposes, but it was temporary. I was going to pay it back. The room went silent. Even his lawyer looked stunned. I should have felt satisfaction. I should have felt vindicated. But all I felt was sad. This was my brother, the boy who'd taught me how to ride a bike, who'd walked me down the aisle when I married Emily's father, who'd held my hand at our mother's funeral, and he'd thrown me away to save himself. The mediator set the report down. Mr. Lawson, this hearing is now a formal investigation into fraud and forgery. Mrs. Lawson, all charges against you are suspended pending further review. We'll reconvene in 30 days. He stood up and left the room. David's lawyer started packing her briefcase, her movements sharp and angry. David just sat there, staring at the table. I walked over to him. "David?" He looked up. His eyes were red. "Why?" I asked. My voice cracked. I hated that it did. "Why did you do this to me?" He opened his mouth, closed it. Finally, he said, "The business was failing. I was going to lose everything. I just needed time." "So you framed me?" I thought you'd be fine. You have your job, your house, you don't need the money like I do." I stepped back like he'd slapped me. "You don't need the money?" I repeated. "David, this wasn't about money. This was about trust. This was about family." "I'm sorry," he whispered. "No," I said. "You're not sorry. You're just caught." I turned and walked out. Robert was waiting in the hallway. "Margaret, that went even better than I expected. With his admission on record, the state will likely drop all charges against you. You're in the clear." "What happens to him?" "That depends. Forgery, fraud, misuse of trust funds, he's looking at serious consequences. But if he agrees to repay the funds and you don't push for criminal charges, he might avoid jail time." If you've ever had to choose between justice and mercy, you know how hard that choice is. I thought about my mother, about the promises we'd made to her, about the life she'd wanted for her children. "I need some time," I said. I went home and sat in my mother's old chair, the one I'd kept after she died. It still smelled faintly like her lavender lotion. Emily called. "Mom, I heard what happened. Are you okay?" "I don't know, honey. I really don't know." "What are you going to do?" I closed my eyes. "I'm going to finish this, but not the way they expect." The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through my mother's things. After she died, I'd packed up her small apartment and stored most of it in my garage. I couldn't bear to go through it all. It hurt too much. But now, I needed to remember who she was, what she'd wanted. I found her journals in a box labeled personal. There were a dozen of them, leather-bound, filled with her neat, slanting handwriting. I opened the one dated 2015, the year she'd been diagnosed. "Margaret came by today," she'd written. "She brought flowers and stayed for hours just talking. I don't remember much of what we said, but I remember feeling loved. David called, said he'd visit next week. He's so busy with work. I worry about him." I flipped forward. "David borrowed money again. He says it's for the business. I want to help, but I'm afraid he's in over his head. Margaret offered to help manage my accounts, but I told her David's handling it. I don't want to burden her. She does so much already." Further still, I asked David about the trust today. He says everything's fine, not to worry, but I saw the look in his eyes. Something's wrong. I should have listened to Margaret. She always knows. The last entry was from a month before she died. "I'm so tired. I just want my children to be okay. I want them to take care of each other. That's all I ever wanted." I closed the journal and wiped my eyes. "Mom," I thought, "they're not taking care of each other, they're tearing each other apart. But I'm going to fix this, not for them, for you." I called Robert the next morning. "I know what I want to do," I said. "I'm listening. I want the trust dissolved. I want the remaining funds, whatever's left after David repays what he stole, to be donated to the community health clinic, the one that took care of my mother when she couldn't afford private care." Robert was quiet for a moment. "Margaret, you're entitled to half of those funds. That's a significant amount of money." "I don't want it. Not anymore. It's tainted. I want it to do some good." "And your brother?" I took a breath. "I won't press criminal charges, but I want him to repay every cent, and I want a formal apology, in writing, to me and to Emily. He may not agree. Then he can go to jail." Robert chuckled. "All right, I'll draw up the terms." It took 3 weeks to finalize everything. David agreed to the terms. He didn't have a choice. The alternative was prison. The day we signed the papers, he showed up at Robert's office looking 10 years older. His suit was wrinkled. His hands shook when he picked up the pen. He signed the repayment agreement. He signed the trust dissolution. And then Robert handed him a sheet of paper. The apology letter, as stipulated. David looked at me. "Margaret, Just read it, David." He read it aloud. His voice was flat, mechanical. "I, David Lawson, apologize to my sister Margaret for the harm I caused her through my actions. I betrayed her trust and attempted to blame her for my mistakes. I am deeply sorry." When he finished, he set the paper down. "Is that all?" he asked. "No," I said. "I want to know why. Really why. Not the business, not the money. Why you were willing to destroy me." He looked away. For a long time, he didn't say anything. Then, quietly, "Because you were always the strong one. You were always fine. After Dad died, after your husband died, you just kept going. I couldn't do that. I fell apart, and I resented you for it." I felt something crack open inside me. Not anger, just sadness. "David," I said, "I wasn't fine. I was barely holding on, but I didn't have a choice. Emily needed me." "I know," his voice broke. "I know, Maggie, and I'm sorry. I really am." I stood up. "I hope someday you mean that." I walked out, and I didn't look back.
Spring came early that year. By March, the legal mess was behind me. The trust was dissolved, the clinic received the donation, enough to fund free care for low-income families for the next 5 years. They named a small wing after my mother, the Margaret Rose Lawson Community Care Wing. When I saw the plaque, I cried, but this time they were good tears. Emily's wedding was in April, just like we'd planned. The morning of the ceremony, she came into my room while I was getting ready. "Mom, I need to tell you something." I turned. She looked so beautiful in her dress, her hair pinned up, her eyes bright. "What is it, honey?" "I didn't invite Uncle David, or Cassie or Brian. I know they're family, but after what they did..." I took her hands. "Emily, that's your choice, and I support it. Are you sure? I don't want you to feel..." "I feel fine," I said, and I meant it. "Today is about you and Jake, not them." She hugged me tight. "I love you, Mom." "I love you too, sweetheart." The ceremony was perfect. Small, intimate, held in a garden overlooking the ocean. The people there weren't connected to me by blood, but by something deeper. There was Linda Chen, Robert's wife, who'd become a friend during the long months of legal battles. There was my coworker Donna, who'd sat with me in the courthouse and held my hand when I couldn't stop shaking. There were patients' families I'd cared for over the years, people who remembered me and wanted to celebrate with me. And when the officiant said, "Who gives this woman to be married?" I stood up, alone, and said, "I do." Emily smiled at me through tears. After the ceremony, during the reception, a man approached me. He was older, maybe 70, with kind eyes. "Mrs. Lawson, I'm Tom Reyes. My wife was a patient of yours. You took care of her during her last days." I remembered her, Maria, a sweet woman who'd loved gardening. "I remember Maria," I said. "She was wonderful." "She always said you were an angel," he smiled. "I wanted to thank you, and I wanted you to know I made a donation to the clinic in her name because of you." I couldn't speak. I just hugged him. That night, after everyone had gone home and Emily and Jake had left for their honeymoon, I stood on my back porch and looked out at the ocean. The sky was full of stars. I thought about my mother, about David, about the year I'd just survived. And I realized something. I'd spent so much of my life trying to be strong for other people, trying to hold everything together. But strength isn't about never breaking. It's about what you do after you break. I'd been broken. My family had shattered me. But I'd rebuilt myself, not with anger or bitterness, but with purpose. Real family is the people who actually want you there. It's been 2 years since the wedding. Emily and Jake are expecting their first child, a girl. They've asked me to help pick out the nursery colors. I suggested lavender, like my mother's favorite flowers. The clinic is thriving. They've expanded their hours and hired 2 new nurses. I volunteer there once a week, doing what I've always done best, taking care of people. David and I don't speak. He sent a card last Christmas, unsigned. I didn't respond. Maybe someday I will, but not yet. Cassie reached out last month. She said she didn't know what her father had done until it was too late. She said she was sorry. I told her I appreciated that, but I also told her trust isn't something you get back just by asking. She understood. The other day, I was at the clinic when a young woman came in with her daughter. The little girl had fallen off her bike and scraped her knee pretty badly. I cleaned the wound, bandaged it up, and gave her a sticker. "You're very brave," I told her. She smiled, gap-toothed and proud. Her mother looked at me. "Thank you. We don't have insurance right now, and I didn't know where else to go." "That's what we're here for," I said. After they left, I sat in the quiet exam room and thought about everything that had brought me here. The betrayal, the fight, the choice to rebuild instead of destroy. And I thought, for the first time, I felt free. So here's my question for you, wherever you are, whatever you're going through. When the people you trust turn against you, when the world feels like it's caving in, when you have every right to be angry and bitter and broken, what would you have done?